This video is going to point out some of the values of using the magic wand tool when photographers are selecting subjects of an image. If you have this, you probably have been given the two images that are needed in working with it. So I'm going to ask you to go to the Open command in your software, navigate to those images. I have a folder containing magic wand images. And the two that we'll be working with are the Ferris wheel JPEG and the windmill JPEG. I'm going to open the two of those. Open them into the software that you're going to be working with. For my demonstration, I'll be using Photoshop Elements because it has a very clear interface. It seems to work well when I'm working with creating a video. But the tool here is just as readily available in full Photoshop as it is in Elements. And so this image you see first, which is nothing very exciting about it, but it's a great demonstration for how would you select the windmill away from the sky if you wanted to adjust it. Well, it's apparent quickly that it would be very hard to use a quick selection tool and catch all of the parts of the windmill, including the wires. They just would be difficult to do. But the magic wand tool works differently. It looks for similar pixels and selects them. And if I were to select all of the sky in this image and did it with the magic wand and then inverted the selection, I would get the opposite, which is the windmill is the opposite of the. So I'm going to use this to select the sky. So you need to go to your selection tools, and in Elements, the magic wand is hidden with the same tool as the quick selection tool. And that can be found, if you don't know where it is, by typing a letter A. And when you get that tool, it has many different tools in it, and included in it is that magic wand tool. I believe you can find that in your selection tools quite easily in Photoshop also. So once I pick that up, I have to click on it. I want to use the default that it is normally used from, but I have one particular need to watch, and that is in the option bar, there is a contiguous box. If it's checked, it won't skip over the wires to get to the background in the middle of the windmill. But if I unclick it, so there's no check on contiguous, when I click on the sky, it will look for similar pixels anywhere in the image. This is much more useful to us. I also want to be sure that I'm starting it out, and here I have 4 ways you can use selection tools. You can start a new selection, which is what we're doing. You can add to it if you need to add more pixels than originally were selected, but you can also subtract in the cases where you picked up something you don't want. That's not a problem in this. Go back to New and take your magic wand and go over the sky anywhere in the screen. And all of a sudden you get almost everything chosen. You don't have the lighter part of the sky. The pixels were different. So what I want to do is add those lighter pixels to the ones that are selected. You can either change the icon in the option bar to add, or you can hold a control key, which will do the same. Now I'm going to click on the whiter ones, and all of a sudden that second click has entirely selected the sky everywhere in the image. This is by far the easiest way to get at the windmill, because now if I go to the select menu, I open it up and I notice it has an inverse choice. What that does, it says, please select everything that is not sky. So I'm going to click on inverse, and all of a sudden the entire windmill is selected, including all of the wires. If I want to adjust the windmill and I have selected it, it will become the mask in any adjustment layer I choose to use. So if I go over to my layers panel and I look for the bicolor circle, which is at the top of the layers panel in Elements, but at the bottom of the layers panel in full Photoshop, and I pop it open, I'm going to say, let's add brightness and contrast to the windmill. So I need the brightness and contrast adjustment layer. When I click on it, magic, look what happens. The windmill is selected in the mask, which means if I go ahead and adjust the brightness and contrast on this layer, it will only be applied to the white part of the mask, which is the windmill. So I'm going to just take a little brightness and add some to it a little bit. And I'm going to add a little contrast to it a little bit. And of course, you can do many other things. But what we've succeeded is selecting and adjusting the windmill in a situation where it would have been very difficult to choose the windmill. Instead, we chose the background with the magic wand and inverted the selection to get to the windmill. You can go ahead now and just close the windmill image and don't save it. It's there for you to practice. We now have another image open, which is the Ferris wheel image, and it is a similar problem. If I want to enhance the baskets of the windmill, and it's, you can imagine, to quite to select all those baskets, it would be awfully hard. But once again, I have a sky that is fairly uniform. So if I take my magic wand tool and I click somewhere in the sky, whatever pixels are similar will become selected. And in this case, they are so similar that in my setting, which was a tolerance of 32, and of course I still had the contiguous unchecked, that 32 tolerance happened to be almost perfect in picking up the entire background. If you had a different tolerance and you didn't get the entire background, then you simply need to add to the selection and include any background that wasn't previously selected. But since mine was totally selected, all I'm going to do is go up here and invert. So select, inverse. Now I have a selection of the Ferris wheel. And let's try it again. Let's go to brightness and contrast adjustment layers. Let's pop open the bicolor circle, choose brightness contrast, and the mask makes it so that the only changes will occur on the selected part, which is the Ferris wheel. So let me go ahead. Let me brighten that part of the image a little. Let me add a little contrast to it. And at this point, I'm going to show you one thing you can do. Once you have the selection made of this part, close my little adjustment panel. I don't need to see that. But you'll see the mask that shows the selection. You can get the selection back and make another adjustment. And the way you do that is by holding down the Command in Mac or the Control in Windows. So hold that key, click the mask, and you've got your selection back. Now, I would like to use that selection and change some of the colors that are in here. I don't want. So I want a hue and saturation adjustment. So I'm going to go up to that bicolor circle, and this time I will choose hue saturation, and that layer opens with the Ferris wheel selected. So any changes that I make in the hue and saturation of this layer will only be applied to the Ferris wheel. Well, I don't much like the dark red in the baskets, so I don't want to change the entire image, which is what would happen with master. Every part of the Ferris wheel would change. I want to change one channel only. And I can take any of these 6 channels and turn it into the bucket of the Ferris wheel. But I normally choose a channel similar to the one I'm going to do, so I'm going to choose the red channel. And you'll notice at the bottom of the window, it tells you that what it gave you is the average mid-red color Ferris wheel. I want to change that color to match what's in my picture. So down in this window, you see some eyedroppers. The first one, when you point to it, will tell you it is the color picker tool. That's the one I want. So I select it. Now I come over my image and I look for a red in the basket. And that's the color I want to work on. So when I click it, my color wheel at the bottom will change. It pops over closer to yellow. It says the color there is actually closer to the yellow than pure red. So now I've chosen that color and I can go ahead and use these tools. I can either lighten it if I think it's too intense, and you realize that the color I checked on may be included in other parts. It actually is part of the color on the framework of the Ferris wheel. If I go and come to that layer where I just made a change in the red channel, if I come and turn it off, you'll see how it gets darker, and so does the metal part of the Ferris wheel. That's because it has some of the same red color. So what you're choosing is any place in the image that contains the color you clicked on will be adjusted. Well, if I look at it and say, well, I really would like it to be saturated, I can pull on the saturation one and that'll bring it more red if I wanted that. Or if I want to put that back to the original 0 point, it doesn't work to double click like so many things do. I go over where my number is, I click on it and change it to 0. Now it's back where it was. But I've got another option, the hue. I could make this a little cooler or warmer light. If I take this top one and I change it, I can change the color. If you look at the Ferris wheel, I can really get rid of the reds and make it quite blue. I can bring it back, or I can make it warmer, go on the warm side of the hue. And if I decide I want to go back where I started, I click in the number box and type a 0. So I decided I'm not going to change the hue. At that point, we've made the changes I want. We're going to close that little thing. And then I'm going to look and say, maybe I'd like to change the sky. It's pretty awful. How could I get back the selection of the sky? Well, if I get back the selection of the Ferris wheel by holding Control on Windows, Command on Mac, and clicking on the mask, I have the Ferris wheel. How do I get back to the sky? I invert it. Go to the Select menu, pop it open, and use Invert. I now am working only on the background. And my problem with the background is it's just too dark. That is a problem with exposure. And when I want to work on exposure, I don't use brightness and contrast. I go to the levels adjustment layer. And because the sky is chosen, if I go up to the bicolor circle and I open a levels adjustment layer, look at the mask. The mask is the sky. So if I make changes in this layer, the changes will affect the sky, not the Ferris wheel. And my usual way, when I look at this levels adjustment layer, look at the gap on the bright side. If I bring my white marker back toward the middle on here, I'm going to lighten up. And just as much as I think I want it, if I don't like the hue, of course, you know what I could do. I could pick up this selection on that layer and then open a hue and saturation layer and change the color of it. So in this particular example, close this off and look at my layer. What I did was I started at the background and I decided that I wanted to select the Ferris wheel. And I knew that it would be very awkward to click on every part of the Ferris wheel. So I used the magic wand tool and I selected the sky. In my case, I got it in one click. But if I didn't get all of the sky, I would have added to the selection, which is either the add icon in the option bar or the control key from the keyboard. And I would have clicked on the pixels that weren't included until I had the entire sky included. And then my intention at that point in my project was to work with the Ferris wheel. So having the background selected, I went to the select menu and I chose inverse, and I immediately had the Ferris wheel selected. And then I opened adjustment layers to work on the Ferris wheel, and because it was selected, it appears in the mask. And the only thing that changes is the Ferris wheel. And when I wanted to make another adjustment on the Ferris wheel, I had to get the selection back. And so I pointed to the mask that selects the Ferris wheel. And with Control on Windows or Command on Mac, if I click on that Ferris wheel selection, I get it back. And when I got it back, I opened another adjustment layer to work on the Ferris wheel. And then the last step was I wanted to change the sky. So I had to get the sky selection back. So all I did was get the selection of the Ferris wheel and invert it with the select inverse. And then I had the sky selected, and I went ahead and made a levels adjustment based on this. Now, when I finish a job like this, and it's my own work and I'm going to use it, I always save it with all of those layers keep being kept. And that means I must save it as a Photoshop document, not a JPEG. And then if I come back another day and I want to work more with it, I have all those layers there. I can get back the Ferris wheel selection, or I can get back the sky selection and continue to work the image. So the Photoshop save is the way you keep your work so you can get back to it at a later. I hope this helps you work with that magic wand tool, which is very useful when you want to separate a subject from its background.